Hello, my name is Paul Marchbanks, and this is Digging in the Dirt. Today I'm going to consider the representation of anger in Denis Villeneuve's Prisoners and in the person of Marvel Comics' The Hulk. Psychologists say that anger is a secondary emotion, a product of the fear or shame that sets it in motion. Trace fury back to the hurt that gave birth to it, and presumably you're in a better position to heal, to permanently change maladaptive behavior. Yes, and I think we can all recognize that anger sometimes takes on a life of its own, becoming a raging fire that burns the bridges behind it, as well as any vulnerable human tinder in front of it. Like a recurring scowl that etches a mask of deep crevices across the face, anger can bake aggression into a single, unchanging shape, an unyielding point of view, unwilling, and eventually unable to consider new evidence or alternative perspectives. Think of this shape as a spear, or if you prefer blunt instruments, a hammer, a tool, unable to recognize complex issues or adversaries as anything other than attractive targets. And if I may extend the metaphor, imagine that this instrument has limited mass to work with, like all of us have limited energy. If you pack most of the mass densely into the tip of the spear, or the face of the hammer, you may be able to strike a few times and do some damage, but the rest of the instrument will crack in the process. We can't, I would argue, wield anger as a weapon without breaking something within ourselves. A few war films have illustrated this effectively, like Stanley Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket and Sam Mendes' Jarhead. To get to the point where we're willing to seriously injure and possibly kill another person, we must first kill something deep inside our own psyche, that involuntary valuation of life which naturally expands to encompass others as well as ourselves. I consider this tendency to be more than a self-preservation instinct. It's more like a moral code hardwired into our very being, a benevolent impulse at war with that equally natural, though differently originating, desire for dominance, that instinct to protect ourselves and those connected to us that sometimes manifests as violence. Stan Lee's and Jack Kirby's unlikely superhero, the Incredible Hulk, one of the more famous incarnations of anger's destructive power in pop culture, gets this very wrong. The Hulk is a fantasy in more ways than one. Just as unrealistic as his signature skin color and nearly unlimited strength, he can lift in excess of 150 tons when enraged, is his ability to repeatedly get angry at others without altering the fundamental gentleness of his host personality, Bruce Banner. The Hulk that headlined the 70s TV show cared enough about his adversaries to regularly warn them, "Don't make me angry. You wouldn't like me when I'm angry." Though his rage predictably exploded towards the villain of each new episode, his anger did not calcify into insensitivity towards the next new bad guy, and he didn't hurt bystanders along the way. This is curated rage that helps maintain law and order. In fact, at times, the Hulk's anger has been configured as a positive good because it makes him so very strong. In Marvel's original Secret Wars storyline from 1984, most famous today for introducing the alien symbiote that would later become Venom, the Hulk prevents mass casualties when the Molecule Man drops an entire mountain on our heroes. As the Hulk begins to buckle under the massive pressure, the shrewd Reed Richards, Mr. Fantastic, mocks him, knowing that the angrier the Hulk becomes, the stronger he will grow and the more time their group will have to escape. Rage equals strength equals salvation. One of the more fantastic modifications to the Hulk in the comic books appeared 2 years earlier, when Banner manages to hold on to his intelligence after transforming into the Hulk. He can now wield the power originally born of rage without having to pay the cost in fractured relationships and collateral damage. And he retains the acumen of a brilliant scientist. This is the version of the Hulk that movie-going audiences would meet in Avengers Endgame. At the turn of the century, these absurd formulas received welcome complications from a couple films. Ang Lee's Hulk from 2003 ties Banner's adult rage to repressed childhood trauma, providing a psychologically plausible mechanism for his transformation into the green behemoth. Louis Leterrier's The Incredible Hulk 5 years later turns our hero into a fugitive running from the government when his loss of control leads to a few people's deaths. In a storyline that draws upon Bruce Jones' memorable work on the comic book at the turn of the century, which I read back when I was in graduate school, Edward Norton's Banner practices meditation to slow down his heartbeat whenever he encounters stressful situations, in successful efforts to prevent his metamorphosis. The change, however, always lurks beneath the surface, ready to emerge when Banner can no longer control himself or chooses to stop trying. Hugh Jackman, whose fifth outing as Wolverine would appear in theaters the same year as Denis Villeneuve's Prisoners, headlines the filmmaker's first American film, playing a character with a potential for violence nearly as great as the X-Men superhero's own notable berserker rage. Jackman's Keller Dover, however, has done much in recent years to restrain what an unexpected catastrophe will later unleash. The film opens with his reciting the Lord's Prayer as his son prepares to shoot a deer, folding both awareness of God's sovereignty and thankfulness for daily provision into an act of violence that Keller believes falls under the aegis of "Thy will be done." Here, our daily bread becomes the venison his son's carefully aimed bullet will put on the table for the Thanksgiving celebration later that day, a sacrifice of blood Keller believes is worth making. Other forms of sacrifice include his setting aside limited resources to prepare for unknown disasters. Though his family barely scrapes together enough to pay the mortgage each month, Keller has a sizable basement stocked with foodstuffs, batteries, and gas masks. Pray for the best and prepare for the worst, he says, and his wife notes that he has made her feel very safe for years. Keller long ago provided his 6-year-old daughter with a red whistle for emergencies, though he has since secretly hidden it because she blew it all the time, and tells his son that if that day comes when a natural disaster knocks out grocery stores and gas stations, prompting people to turn on each other, quote, all that stands between you and being dead is you. Accordingly, we know a bit about the way Keller's brain works and can anticipate how he might react when his youngest child is abducted in the first 10 minutes of the film. Which appears to come first for Keller? Faith in divine deliverance, or that ethos of self-reliance instilled in so many North Americans? How compatible are these two things? Does prayer for guidance necessarily give the stamp of approval to action? What if one leads with action and only inserts prayer after their actions have gained so much momentum that it's nearly impossible to reverse course? Are there situations in which a loving God might condone the decision to not turn the other cheek and love one's enemies? Tenets pretty central to Christ's teaching. A cross hangs from Keller's rearview mirror, and we see one around his neck early in the film. What does this really symbolize for him deep down? Speaking in his absence, his wife Grace says that Keller is a good man. At this particular point in the film, we know far more about Keller than we did at the beginning. We've learned that his father, a security guard at Pennsylvania's Graterford prison, who taught Keller to be ready for anything, shot himself in the head in their apartment years earlier, leaving his body to be discovered by a young Keller and his mother. We know that Keller since has developed a problem with alcohol, but also that he has avoided drinking for nearly a decade. We've watched anger, once it takes hold of him, tighten his entire body like a bowstring waiting to be loosed. and we've witnessed his efforts to seek religious guidance as he listens to a pre-recorded talk about the importance of penitence under affliction, a sermon-like message that humanity should expect the trouble it faces because of the world's sinfulness. At a pivotal moment, Keller has attempted to recite the Lord's Prayer once again and has stumbled over the bit about forgiving others. Forgiveness in the face of great evil is difficult for anyone and appears to elude Keller, as does that hope which Christianity provides. Keller's struggle is all the starker because placed alongside the behavior of others. His friend Franklin, though dealing with precisely the same recent loss as Keller, his youngest daughter was kidnapped too, does not rush towards rage, but exhausts his own anguish with long walks through the woods, holding on to hope. Detective Loki, who's never failed to solve a case before, is capable of approaching horrifying events calmly, his methodical calculations slowly chewing on every clue he can find. Even he, however, loses his cool and erupts a few times. I don't tend to lash out with loud yelling, hit walls, or throw people up against the wall when I'm angry, but I do know how powerful anger can make you feel. One summer day, while I was working as a bag boy at a local grocery store in eastern Tennessee, I suddenly felt deep, undirected rage and decided to experimentally nurture it for a good half hour. I can't identify a catalyst. I don't recall any customers or co-workers irritating me, and the job was not that bad. Boring? Yeah, and I didn't enjoy spending time organizing packs of cigarettes on their rotating display stands. I had asthma, which secondhand smoke always worsened. There was no good reason for me to be angry, and yet I was. And as I hitched a ride on the grocery carts I was directing down the sloped parking lot and into their stalls, I could just imagine letting loose, intentionally smashing into someone's car or cursing at someone without cause, dramatically changing their day, and probably mine too. The feeling was intoxicating and pretty scary. It got me to thinking later about how unjustified my anger probably was most of the time. It makes sense to get angry when faced with injustice that affects others more than yourself, but I don't think my anger usually had such virtuous prompting. Is it possible that most of our anger is unnecessary and more destructive than useful? What of the anger in Villeneuve's film? Does it help get things done? Does it lubricate the problem-solving process or gum up the moral machine? Is Keller's anger and Detective Loki's as useful as the Hulk's or Wolverine's? What do you think?